Joining me now is Deputy Premier of New South Wales, who's leading the bushfire recovery effort in our worst fire-ravaged regions, John Barilaro. John, welcome to the program from Canberra. Can I start by asking for your reaction to those clips of Turnbull changing his tune on the link between climate and bushfires, and what's your view on what's caused these bushfires?
Oh, well, I had a lot to say about Malcolm when he was the Prime Minister, and that's been well documented in the media. But the big part of it, why I thought he wasn't the right man to lead the country at the time, was he wasted and squandered his position as Prime Minister. And I actually thought he was going to be a great Prime Minister, and he didn't do that because he actually sold out. And if he was genuine at the time about climate change, well, he didn't show it. And I think you tonight, Shari, have clearly proven that he'll say one thing when you're in the political world and your own job's on the line versus now outside of politics. You know, the best former Prime Ministers are the ones that stay quiet. So that'd be my only advice for Mr Turnbull.
Now, Mr Barilaro, to your own government, I had Matt Keane on my show last week, and he advocated, well, he had a very similar position to Turnbull's just had when he spoke about climate change as being one of the leading factors this bushfire season. Do you accept, John, that there's also been mismanagement of the land by your own government, which has exacerbated this bushfire season?
Yeah, look, firstly, you know, it's quickly as the leader of the National Party, you know, people want to accuse the Nats or the Nationals or even myself that we're deniers. Firstly, you know, we believe in climate change because we live it each and every day in the regions. In regional rural New South Wales, we're going through one of the worst droughts in recorded history. We get the floods. We deal with climate change, and the climate's changing consistently, and we've done that for centuries, and we deal with it as farmers and as landholders. But the second part of it is about how do you then manage when, because of climate change, we're going to get longer dry periods, we're going to have greater risk for fires. There are three components to fires: oxygen, ignition, which is lightning predominantly, and then fuel. And fuel's the only thing we can actually manage is fuel reduction, either by hazard reduction or mechanical reduction of fuel. And there's no question, if you look at the data, from 2002 to 2012, the average in our national parks in hazard reduction or mechanical means was around 53,000 hectares from 2012 over the last 7 years. Yes, that's increased to about 139,000 hectares. But that's still an arbitrary number. Who decided 139,000 hectares was the right amount?
So what you're saying here is there's not enough hazard reduction has happened?
Absolutely. And it's not just national parks, it's state forests, it's Crown lands, it's what council's responsible for. We have not had a culture to deal with the fuel load. I mean, and I hear it on the ground now. I've travelled the state in my role as the Minister for Recovery. I'm speaking to communities face to face. They fear being a neighbour of national parks. They believe that national parks does very little to protect their property and their life. Their whole focus has always been on conservation.
But Deputy Premier, this is the responsibility. Deputy Premier, this is the responsibility of your government, the government where you are the second most senior person, and you have let farmers down across the land by, you know, in this time, as you say, where we have climate change in the world, the conditions are hotter, when we're coming off the back of a drought, and there has been too much fuel on the ground, and farmers haven't been allowed to clear their land, even using an excavator, not fire.
Well, Shari, as the leader of the Nationals and the National Party in this term of government, in the last couple of terms, we fought hard for the changes to the biodiversity legislation that allowed farmers to be able to manage their lands in a productive way. And we've been very, very vocal in relation to fuel reduction in the past, and we haven't achieved it. Sometimes our fight isn't the Greens, and I'm not going to blame the Greens. And yes, we're living with Bob Carr's legacy of lock up the forest and now we're watching him burn. We are in power, so I'm not going to shrug that.
Bob Carr hasn't been in power for a very long time now. Like, would you say there's been mismanagement by your own government?
Shari, it's not about mismanagement. It's about a lack and a will to actually do more. And sometimes the fight is between the Nats versus our Liberal colleagues. But on the biodiversity legislation, Labor voted against it.
Well, you talk about a lack of will to do more. I just want to play you this clip from an interview I did with the Premier of New South Wales, Gladys Berejiklian, on November 29, just a couple of months ago at the start of the fire season. Have a listen. Why did the Department of Environment fail to meet its backburning targets in both 2017 and 2018? The targets were, as I understand it, about 130,000 hectares, and yet on each of those years around only 90,000 hectares were actually subject to backburning and hazard reduction.
Yes, Sherry, with all due respect, I'm not sure where you got your numbers from, but I'll tell you this. When we came to government, we increased hazard reduction, as we call it, which is done when there aren't bushfires, by, we increased hazard reduction, I should say, by 250% compared to the previous Labor government. So we
the figures are from both the Deputy Premier, John Barilaro, and confirmed by the Environment Minister, Matt Keane, that those targets weren't met in 2017 and 2018.
Right. But we also look at what we call rolling averages of what we've done. If you compare what we've done to the previous government, as I said, it's more than double in many instances. So we're confident that we've done everything we can in New South Wales to prevent more devastation.
Deputy Premier, do you ever stand up to the Premier and say, this isn't good enough?
Well, firstly, what the Premier said is what I said at the start of tonight. I said that the previous 10 years to 2012, the average was 53,000 hectares. In the past 7 years, under our government, it's 139,000 hectares average. So she's spot on. The Premier is spot on. But what I've been arguing is, why is 139,000 the target or the average when the estate has grown? And I think it represents less than 1% of the estate being managed. So we do need to increase the amount of hazard reduction that's happening in the park. And we know, look at the intensity of this year's fires. It's catastrophic fires. Everyone is talking about fuel reduction. You know, at the end of the day, it's fuel reduction, it's managing our lands better, it's mechanical, it's not just burning. And we've got to be open to all these new measures if we know that the risk is growing because of climate change.
Look, the New South Wales government, the Premier and the leadership of the RFS, including the Fire Chief, Shane Fitzsimmons, they both seem to be resisting the need for a Royal Commission into the fires in terms of what caused them and how they were handled. Do you support having one?
Yeah, I'm not sure if they're resisting. I think there's still a conversation, but I definitely support it, and I've said it before. And the reason I support a Royal Commission is if we just have internal inquiries, agency on agency, looking at what's occurred over this summer, we'll get the same result that we've had for the last decade or two. Let's have an independent inquiry or Royal Commission right across the board with terms of reference that looks at everything that's in front of it. And I think that if you put some transparency around it, for the first time, I think we can have a real honest debate about this. We can put ideology aside, we can put politics aside, because our communities are screaming. They are telling us they want us to do something about the way we manage land. And that's not just about hazard reductions, but managing land. No one wants to be a neighbour of the national parks anymore because, you know, their fences are let go, the weeds that come out, the feral animals that come out, and now, of course, hazard reduction or the lack of. It's just, they're the worst neighbour that you can have as a landholder in this state.
Yeah. Yeah, and I had a farmer on my show last week who had 2 national parks on the border of his land, and he wrote to the RFS boss, to Shane Fitzsimmons, weeks before the fire hit his property and torched his property, and he was not given permission to clear some land around it. So, and this is what farmers are saying time and time again, and you must see it because you've been going to all the fire-ravaged regions in the past couple of weeks as you're leading this recovery effort.
Absolutely. It's the first topic that we talk about. I mean, everyone's got excited about let's start a debate about climate change. You know, that debate's been had for a decade. We know the impact of climate change. We've got Paris. We're going to meet our emissions targets most likely. We're doing exactly what we said we would do. We can't stop exporting alcohol because this is where Mr Turnbull got it wrong. If we stop exporting alcohol overseas, we've got the best, cleanest coal in the world. Those countries will use dirtier coal. You'll actually have a negative impact on the emissions. So the reality is we're doing everything in relation to targets and our emissions targets, but they're medium to long term. Short term, people on the ground, farmers, landholders, communities who have lost their homes are saying we've got to do something about the fuel and the risk that's associated with it. And you don't have to hear it from me. You travel, talk to the RFS volunteers. You know, as a local member leading to every summer, I always hear this is going to be a bad summer because there's a lot of fuel. Well, this summer was catastrophic and it's all come true. And it always takes a crisis, unfortunately, for us to learn, but we have to learn. I don't think we've learned it in the past, but we have to learn. If we don't learn this time, well, God help us.
Look, just before you go, John, just very quickly, you lent your support to the Nationals' Deputy Leader federally, Bridget McKenzie, a couple of days ago. Are you still standing by her, or do you think that enough evidence has now emerged and that she should step down in the coming days?
Well, like I said, I was asked the question. There was a review of the criteria in the process, and I said until at such time that review is completed, why are people making judgment calls, or why is there noise around leadership or her position as deputy leader? I think that was premature. As the review and as the evidence comes forward, the Prime Minister will make a decision. And I know Bridget. I've had many encounters with Bridget, and I think she's a good member, someone that fights for the bush more than anyone. But you know, let's see what comes off it over the next few days, and I'll be able to say more about it after that.
John Barilaro, thank you very much for your time, and good luck with helping families out there as they try and rebuild their homes and communities. Appreciate it.